The Danny Thomas Hour, usually seen at this time, will not be presented tonight so that we may bring you the following special program.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I remember when The Dark Knight Returns came out. I remember when Watchmen came out. So, of course, I remember when Kingdom Come came out.
Kingdom Come is 4 separate issues, 48 pages apiece. It was an all-immersive kind of lifestyle for me.
It blew people away. I mean, this was the most sought-after book there was.
This was something very new, very different.
No one had seen anything like that at that scale before.
It was amazing.
I never thought from anything that people would still be talking about this book 25 years later.
Welcome back, everybody. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntra is here. I was just telling Michael Kingston off the air that it's been so long since he's been on Word Balloon. I'm like, have we done one before? I know we talk at conventions, but thank God we did. Long overdue catching up with Michael Kingston and his wonderful Headlocked comics. And folks, if you're listening or watching and you don't know about what Michael does, you're going to love this, because truly, this is a guy that bleeds wrestling and is so ingrained in the sport. And I appreciate that from a marketing standpoint. I appreciate that from a content standpoint. The guy makes great wrestling comics, unlike any others. Welcome, Michael. Good to see you.
It's a heck of a lead-in. I appreciate it.
Well, it's the truth, man. I know. I speak from experience. And you've been kind, and you've given me books to sample over the years. Well, you've got a brand new campaign going on, or I should say, well, you tell me. You've got a book coming up, and we'll show the cover in a second. But Vampiro?
Yes. It's
Vampiro? How do I say it?
Vampiro Rockabilly Apocalypse. It's very different than anything that I've done. It's I'm writing it for Master Republic, and it's coming out through Massive Publishing. So it's the first book I've had in stores since I wrote some of those WWE books for Boom. So it's been a minute, but this is very different than anything that I've done, but it's so much fun. It's been one of the funnest experiences making comics. So I think it's there's no wrestling in it. It's just, it features Vampiro, who is a wrestler, but even if you didn't know who he was, it wouldn't matter to the story. It's just, we popped him in, and he's such a unique personality. We popped him into this scenario, and over the years, I've been making comics for 15 years, and I've had all these weird, ideas and stuff that don't fit in what I do wrestling wise. And I mean, I like a certain type of movies and whatever. So, I'm just storing ideas for someday when I might do something else. And I got the opportunity to pitch for this, and I brought out all the weird stuff, the weirdest stuff I could come up with, and it's been super, super fun. I'm in the middle of 7 projects right now, and every time I open it up to work on it, it's just like a little treat. So it's been great, and I hope people come on the ride with us, because it's a lot of fun.
Now tell me, because I've heard a little about Massive, I should say. Who runs Massive?
So I don't deal with them directly. I just deal with Master Republic. So they have an imprint through Massive, and they're publishing Lucha titles. So they do the Luchaverse books that have been coming out for the last couple months.
Cool.
And then, so I just deal with Master Republic. I mean, I've met some of the guys, but I don't really have a lot of dealings with them directly. This is more of me writing for Master Republic, and then they're publishing it through Massive. They've been a great partner. They've let me do whatever I want, and they've given me tons of freedom. And that's always been my problem. I guess I've published myself for years, and comics are hard. In the best of circumstances, comics are hard to make. And if I'm going to kill myself to make comics, I want to make the stuff that I want to make. So, for the longest time, I've done just direct to consumer, Kickstarter, selling my stuff at shows and whatever. But they've really been a fantastic partner on the creative side. They just let me, they gave us some parameters and just let me do what I want. And that's been great. I mean, 0 notes so far, and I'm 4 issues in. So
Wonderful, man. Well, and also, like you said, how I envision this, and especially as you describe it, I love that so many of the wrestlers have taken their brand and made action movies or whatever. And it's cool. I mean, essentially, this is like a comic version of that, where you've put Vampiro on. Tell me about the story.
So it's Vampiro as an underground rockabilly guitarist who's sort of like a legend. If you know, you know, kind of thing. And he shows up and plays shows, kind of just never advertised, just always appears.
Oh,
and then at the conclusions of the shows, he hunts monsters and with his guitar that turns into a literal axe. And it's very grindhousey. It's very, like I like Robert Rodriguez flicks and that kind of stuff. And it's that kind of energy that, I grew up in the 80s when you'd have like the absurdity of like Blood Beach. You go to a Blockbuster and half of the horror movies were just pure nuts, right? Puppet Master and stuff. So I like to imbue absurdity and action into my stuff. And so and I can spoil this, I guess, because the solicits are out, but starting in issue 2, we are, the antagonist for a couple issues is a motorcycle gang of nuns that carry shotguns called the Bad Habit, and they're hunting Vampiro. So, they're sort of like heaven's like, I don't know, little mafia.
Avenging angels, basically.
Yeah. So,
okay.
But and then so they get wrapped up in it. But so it's Vampiro, and then his sort of partner, sidekick driver, Estrella Nocturna, and then there's a music blogger that starts the story out where he's trying to sort of hunt Vampiro and get an interview with him, and he gets pulled into it. And then they unexpectedly uncover a plot to jumpstart the apocalypse, and it all just kind of goes from there. I call it Preacher meets Cannonball Run, I guess, if people were looking for a frame of reference.
That's a great idea, man. I always said for years, and especially after watching that Ken Burns country music documentary, and I heard about Hank Williams Sr. and Lefty Frizzell. And Mike, if I could draw, I'm much along the lines of what you're suggesting with Vampiro. It's like, okay, these guys plan all the crazy honky tonks, city to city, and are just stumbling into supernatural problems. And that's, so I love what you're doing. I think that's great. And again, it's, we're on the same vibe when it comes to that, man. I think that's great. Sounds fantastic.
It's very tonally similar to Dusk Till Dawn. I would say there's a little humor, there's a little horror, there's a lot of action.
Yeah. Supernatural.
The
TV show Supernatural. I just had Jeremy Adams on, not only to talk about comics, but he was a writer on Supernatural for a couple seasons too.
So I'm going to tell you, I've never seen an episode of Supernatural.
Mike, I've seen
I don't even know what it's about. I've spent a ton of time with Jared Padalecki at shows.
That's cool.
Like in the green room and stuff, but I have no idea what,
It's a great, thankfully it's like over-the-air TV classic in terms of, there's an overarching story and seasons, but you can watch it done in one and be very satisfied. And dude, here, let me give you, it's on Netflix. And if you're ever going to watch any episode, they did a Scooby-Doo crossover where they get sucked into the cartoon.
Oh, nice.
And it is hilarious. Jensen Ackles is totally hitting on Daphne the whole time. And right. And between the brothers, they're just telling inside jokes and everything. It's very, very funny and very true to both Supernatural and Scooby-Doo. So Scooby-Natural.
And I think that's the trick to doing stuff like this. Like there's a real lazy way that you can hack this out, right? Like I'm not trying whatever. They did a Kevin Nash series years ago through Image. Okay. And it was horrible. Like it was sort of like Kevin Nash's Blade Runner, but it just wasn't good. Like there wasn't anything to it. It was just the bare bones of what you would expect of a sort of hacked out license thing to be. And, I put a lot of my best ideas in this, because there's just so much I've wanted to do. And obviously the cool thing about it too, is that, this arc is 10 issues. It's a double-sized first and it's a double-sized last. And then after that, we can do whatever, right? He's a vampire. So, I mean, we could take him to the future. We can put him wherever. And I think that's, we can tell all kinds of stories. I mean, we can do a wrestling story if we want, I mean, we don't have to, but we could do a thing where he's not a wrestler, but he's hiding and, has to hide out or something, whatever. But like, and then Vamp himself is just such a singular personality. And one of the cool things about being around wrestlers is some of these guys just carry so much personal charisma. Like, they're just cool, like in a way that like you kind of want them to like you. And, like Hulk Hogan is like that. I mean, he's done all the things that he's done and people know who he knows, but you're in the room with him and he's like, oh man, it's Hulk Hogan. And you can't escape that. It's hypnotic. Paul Heyman is like the devil. I mean, the first time I met Paul Heyman, he was just so seductive. I was like, oh my God. Like, it's amazing. But so Vampiro just has this incredible sort of personal charisma, but then he's into like all kinds of weird stuff and occult stuff and ancient aliens and whatever. So like just sort of mixing his sort of, imbuing his personality into that character, and then just sort of, just riffing on just craziness. Like I kind of want to make it almost like overall, like once we get through this, like a Grindhouse Planetary almost, right? Where like you can kind of go everywhere and, experience all these weird stuff and sort of be in all these weird situations, but he's always got the Bonneville and, whatever, and just kind of keep that sort of rockabilly edge to it. But I think, I could write it forever. So I just want to write it as long as people will let me.
So does it come out mid-October, or is the final order cut off mid-October?
No, October 16th is the release date. It comes out the day before New York Comic Con, and we're doing a signing at the Wrestling Universe that night, but then Vampiro will be with me at New York Comic Con on Thursday. And then, we've got solicits are out for 2 and 3. I'm working on issue 5 right now. It's like I said, man, I try to make it as weird as possible, but not weird for the sake of weird, right? Like I think there's ways that, because I've always been a fan of like some of those like absurdist horror movies and stuff. Sure. But then sometimes you can kind of go too far, I think. Like if that's your intention, like you're just making stuff weird for the sake of weird, then that doesn't work either. Like there's a line you got to walk to where things are serious and there's some kind of stakes and you care about stuff, but it's it's been so much fun to write. Like I said, I just want to, it's so different than anything I've ever had a chance to do, in my career. So I've had some opportunities, but like the pandemic wiped out a bunch of stuff. But I mean, at one point I had a thing pitch in at Marvel with Ed McGuinness, do a wrestling thing. And we were trying to do a Crusher Hogan story at one point. But there's been a bunch of things, but the pandemic took a lot from me. So I've been sort of building myself back up. And then we actually have a series I'm starting on Kickstarter probably in 2 weeks. It'll probably come out right after Vampiro releases, called Friday Night Bigfoot, about a guy in Portland in 1985 that trains Bigfoot to wrestle to save his family-owned promotion from getting overrun by the big corporate sort of WWE style company that's, laying waste to all the territories. And we get Bigfoot hooked on coke because it's the 80s and that's what you do. And it's another thing that's just been super, super fun to write. We have some incredible merch for it. So I'm just, in addition to doing Headlocked and Tales from the Road, and then I have 2 licensed projects that I can't talk about, but
okay.
Crazy stuff coming out.
All right, here I got one of your Tales for the Road covers, a great EC tribute, which is fantastic. But Mike, honestly, the merchandise and the variant covers that you do, so smart. And truly, I know, and man, I felt for you. I was looking at your website and you talked about how COVID really took a bite out of your ass because you hand sell. You go to these shows. You're a road warrior, man, much like the wrestlers. And you really
shows
do
this year.
What's that?
I'll have 30 shows this year by the end.
This is what I'm saying, man. And again, that's the thing. You are really out there. And luckily, I know you've got this Bangor, Maine show right before New York that you're doing this weekend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you have any wrestlers with you at that Bangor show?
I actually don't.
Okay.
It's just it's interesting. Like sometimes I like to go with guys, and I did a lot of stuff with Jerry. Jerry had a stroke last year, so he's a little bit more limited in what he can do travel wise. He's still hitting the shows and stuff, but and we've got some more shows scheduled, but this wasn't a show for that. And kind of the cool thing now is, I mean, for a long time I had to travel with wrestlers, and that's what got me in the door at places. But now I've made comics long enough that I can get guest gigs on my own merits as a creator, which is cool. So that helps out a lot. But yeah, we'll have a big lineup of guys at New York. We'll have Vampiro, Danhausen, Mick Foley, Rikishi, Joe Hendry. I think Booker T. Got a couple more. Yeah, we got a jacked up lineup for New York. I always try to present big, make a lot of noise at New York and San Diego, just so people see what we do. And then we got the Vamp launch coming out, so that's going to be a big focus.
Sure. Honestly, Mike, I'm always, I remember watching Jerry Lawler sketch at your table one year at one of the shows. And, I was going to ask regarding Vampiro and everything, how involved was he in terms of talking story with him or ideas? Again, you know your stuff, man. I mean, I trust the persona just from observation, but yeah, tell me what his involvement was in the show, in the comic.
I spent a lot of time talking to Vampiro. We did like a big hour and a half long call before, I had a rough idea of what I wanted the initial series to be, because I had already made the pitch, and there were a lot of people who really liked it and wanted to go that way. So, we spent a lot of time talking, and he was at my San Diego Comic-Con booth. I try to imbue a lot of his sensibilities and stuff into it, and then he'll probably have more of an active hand in the future in shaping the sort of future arcs. But this one was sort of set before we met. But it's he's been able to sort of give me some guidance too. So
sure,
he's a real interesting. He came to the first day of San Diego Comic-Con in a zoot suit. Like he looked like a hitman for like the Pope's Mafia or something. I mean, I don't know. It was amazing. But he could pull it off. Like there's not a lot of people there. And then the next day he came and he just dressed like a biker, and he pulled that off too. And I don't know. It's insane.
Now, and again, Mike, I really am a novice. I mean, my era was that 80s era when WWF was doing, even before they got involved with NBC. But Tuesday Night Titans, I was there for all that, and I loved that and everything.
Love it so much.
But yeah, so modern day. So again, is Vampiro? He's a luchador, or Massive just does luchador comics?
No. Vampiro is one of the most famous luchadors in Mexico. His podcast down there is insane. He was at La Mole this weekend, had a huge line waiting to meet him. He was part of he toured with the Misfits for a little bit, so he plays music too. And that's why the whole character all kind of stems from him, right? Sure. It's his swagger, and I mean, he played music, and his character is a vampire. So we imbue all that stuff, and so it all makes sense. It's not just we're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. But he was. I mean, he's one of the most famous luchadors in of the modern era, and he was a huge part of Lucha Underground when that was on TV. He was a commentator, and then part of probably the biggest arc in the show, probably responsible for the most memorable moment on the show. Him and Pentagon, and so yeah, he's done a lot of amazing stuff. He was in WCW towards the end of the WCW era there in the late 90s. Yeah, he's done so much stuff. He just had his retirement match a couple of weeks ago, and I don't, you never know about retirements in wrestling, or a dime a dozen. So who knows? But
I remember in the late 90s, Terry Funk came to Chicago and did an independent show. Mm-hmm. And and it was a sweetheart of a guy, at least in my experience.
Oh yeah. 100%.
But yeah, okay, good to hear. Because some guys, 90% of people in comics, 90% of the people in wrestling are sweetheart guys. But every now and then, there's a guy that's an type A personality. What are you going to do? But yeah, it's been interesting. I don't know if I ever told you, Mike, but through Art Baltazar and Franco, I got to really, I should say on an acquaintance level, Christopher Daniels and Kazarian, when they were just the duo. And everything. And fascinating talking to Chris. And he's such a big comic book fan.
He is. He
And
was one of the OG guys that helped me, like the
oh, that's
OG
great.
comic guys. Daniels, Hurricane, Rob Van Dam, Samoa Joe, like those guys that were like hardcore comic fans were the guys that really helped me, before I had Jerry, like when I was just a guy with a preview book in Artist Alley trying to sell stuff. I mean, they did a lot for me. And they still do a lot for me. Kazarian was just at my San Diego Comic-Con booth this year. He's still tearing it up in TNA. Daniels has more of an office job with AEW now, but he still wrestles from, a lot. But yeah, those guys were huge helps to me starting out.
That's great to hear, man. Well, and again, this is why if people don't know about your comics and love wrestling, they will absolutely love all your books because you really this sport. You really get into this sport. And I know Dan Housen has been a guy that has done stories with you and stuff. We'll get into Tales of the Road and some of the other stuff that you've got out there. But yeah, man, no, it's really great. And you're a great representative of the comics world and the wrestling world. And again, you do it right. And I know a lot of people watch Word Balloon that are aspiring creators and stuff. And you're the kind of guy that it's like, this is what you got to do. And beyond making good books and having the variant covers and things, I mean, I love that. And it's I took this off your Facebook page. You can see I'm assuming that's a Jerry Lawler autograph. Yep. But
no, that's my autograph.
Oh, excuse me, Michael.
That Jerry Lawler painted that cover.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. And for the audio audience, and again, this is why you got to every now and then check in with YouTube on Word Balloon's YouTube channel. It's this fantastic Saturday Evening Post / Norman Rockwell style. And this is really painterly of Jerry. I've never seen him. I mean, I'm used to seeing him. And I know when I saw you guys at some show, he was just doing his favorite character, Superman, and just doing headshots of Superman, which he does great, by the way. Yeah. And I've seen your covers of his over the years and stuff. But yeah, man, I mean, that's really, really cool. And I do love the framing of, and I know you have other variant covers that have that Saturday Evening Post / Norman Rockwell style. Very smart. Very smart.
The thing that I always try to sell, I guess, more than anything else is passion, right? Like everybody that works on all the wrestlers that work on Headlock love comics and storytelling, and all the comic people that I get like wrestling. So Jerry, wrestling is a job for him, right? Like, and he did it for 50 years, but he loves art. I've been to more art museums with Jerry than any other person on the planet. And there's a lot of people who just see him as like the puppies guy. And he is, to a certain extent, he's that guy, but he's also one of the biggest art nerds I know. And we'll go to art museums and and hang out. And so Jerry has a Norman Rockwell original at his house, loves Norman Rockwell.
Wow.
And, so I asked him to do Norman Rockwell covers for me. He was excited to do them, and he knocks them out of the park, right? Like if you're talking about young creators, right? Like this, I feel like the biggest thing is, talk to your artists, writers about the stuff they like to draw and the stuff they don't like to draw, and like try to figure it out, right? Like if they don't like to draw cars, don't put cars in the book unless you can't help it. And then they're probably not the right artist for the book. But like, people are always going to do a better job if they're excited to work on it. So
very smart.
I think that's and that's everything that we do. So, when we do stories, the story you showed earlier, the cover for Lita, we did so the idea of Tales from the Road is basically stories that you would come up with in the back seat on a long car trip, right? They're not legitimate stories. So Lita's dog, who's on that thing, has since passed, but she used to bring Kens to every show. So like we came up with an idea where she was like a lucha detective, and the dog was with her, and it was kind of like a Scooby-Doo vibe. And then but the dog doesn't talk, but like the dog is low key solving the case. Just fun stuff like that. And so when you start hitting the things that they love, right? Like, cause again, it's hard as a fan to look at wrestling as a job for somebody, but when I talk to guys, I'll be like, hey, you want to do this show? And they'll be like, oh, I'll have to check with work. But when they're talking about work, they're talking about the WWF, which is crazy to me, right? That's work. But it is. So when you hit people in the things that they're passionate about, you get more out of them. Dolph Ziggler, or Nick Nemeth now, is a huge Trauma fan. So we did this
Oh,
sort
wow.
of Toxic Avenger riff where like a nerdy wrestler gets thrown into a dumpster, and like the combination of like steroids and beer and self-tanner turns him into this giant, like sort of Toxic Avenger style wrestler. And he enforces the rules of locker room. And like, that's the kind of stuff, right? And some of the stories are adapted from real life stories and whatever, but like a lot of the stuff is just stuff we come up with. You know, Jay White liked Willy Wonka, and we did a story that was, what if Willy Wonka was a wrestling school and not a chocolate factory? And what does that look like? And it's super fun, right? There's little masked Oompa Loompas with like little, you know, wrestling masks and stuff and whatever. Like, so, you know, I guess that's the trick, right? Like, it's just hitting people where they're passionate about and making something that everybody's on board for, and not just being like, you know, draw this art monkey or write this, you know, whatever. Like, and you see so much of that, you know, especially in young creators trying to find their way. But that's what we've always tried to do with Headlocked. I mean, I always wanted the book to be so authentic, you know, and a lot of wrestlers asked me if I ever wrestled before they knew me, because after they read the book, and that carries a lot of weight with me. And then our artist on Headlocked is Mikel Molopolo, who's a Samoan wrestler from New Zealand. So we use a lot of wrestlers in the art production part of it as well, which is, I think, another element that, you know, kind of just hammers our theme home of wrestling and art.
Well, authenticity, man. It's all about that, and that's kind of the 21st century buzzword, and your books absolutely represent that kind of authenticity with wrestling. Do the governing bodies, because I know that in some cases they control the likeness and the persona that a wrestler will bring to the ring. Any landmines in terms of dealing with a WWE or an AEW or whomever?
So we don't use actual wrestlers. We make fictional analogs of the characters with different names. You know, Ric Flair was Platinum Prescott and whatever. So it's that guy without having to get into that stuff. And that's not I don't even know if it would be a problem, but it's not worth my time, right? Like I'm already overextended. The last thing I want to do is you know, fight a war with, you know, because I've not run afoul, but like WWE squashed a project that I had set up for this year that was a real good project, more to punish the wrestler that we were supposed to do it with. But I think you'll still see it someday. But, you know, I found out on the morning of San Diego Comic-Con when we were going to announce it on my panel that we couldn't do it. So that was annoying. But so I try to stay away from all that stuff if I can help it. Just, it's easier that way to and then the other thing too is, I mean, the harder thing is if you're using somebody as themselves and the story needs them to look stupid or something, they might not want to do it because they think that person, right? Like, because then it's them. And so it's easier if it's like, it's not you. This is just an analog, right? Like, you have to get captured for us to make a comeback, right? But then they don't want to, you know, so some of that can be difficult sometimes. But so that's why we do the analog stuff, and it's just a lot smoother.
Well, again, smart moves, man. I haven't watched that McMahon documentary that's on Netflix currently yet. I don't know if you have.
I don't think so. I mean, I think I know everything that's on it. Like, most of the stuff that comes out wrestling wise, like for the public, is stuff that I know a great deal about. Like, I didn't watch the Iron Claw because I know the whole thing. Like, I've seen about a dozen documentaries. I've read books. I mean, it's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm at that level of understanding of things that it's not really, I'm not going to break any new ground on it. So, and if I do, like, it's not enough to spend like 6 hours to learn one thing. So,
well, and also, like, it's funny you say that because I always bring up the example of the movie Moneyball, which I delayed watching I didn't see it in the theater because I was still in sports radio and we were covering that story about the A's. And I'm like, I know this. This was a day-to-day thing when I worked on this at this national network. I'm like, I don't need to see that movie. And then, of course, I saw it. I'm like, oh, my God, this is a great baseball movie. So, no, I get it. And I so hear you about things like Iron Claw and things like that. No, man. And again, I am that novice that one of my best friends who hopefully will listen to this because I'm going to definitely tell him to because he's such a wrestling nerd and just loves the thing. And he was even with me last year when we saw each other at C2E2. But, yeah, he knows everything modern chapter and verse. He DVRs everything. So, you know, I was always surprised regarding Luchadores and Lucha Underground that after El Rey folded, nobody picked up that show because that was an intriguing way of really giving good representation and also another federation that I mean, I don't even know beyond New Japan, I want to say, and AEW and WWE. I don't even know what's Ring of Honor I'm aware of.
TNA is still, I mean, they're the third biggest. So the thing about Lucha Underground is it wasn't really a wrestling company. It was a TV show, right? Like, and there's a very big difference. Like, so for years, right, WWE has been a wrestling company that makes TV, but then like you get shows that, Lucha Underground was a TV show that put on wrestling.
Okay.
And so like those guys, they shot themselves in the foot in so many different ways, but they were also a big victim of, in 2016, 17, 18, whatever, like WWE started warehousing wrestlers. And then, and then once AEW became a possibility, they started signing more and more people, and they just, all that initial talent just went away, right? Like Ricochet was one of their main guys, and John Morrison and Rey Mysterio and Pentagon and Phoenix and whatever. And they're all in Taya. They're all in WWE or AEW or whatever. So it's, they took all their guys, and then it's just hard sometimes to replace, there's, when you have, I don't want to say lesser performers or performers that maybe aren't necessarily suited to that type of presentation. And then it's not necessarily the same. And I think that was the hardest part. I think for a couple seasons, it was unbelievable. And then they had the whole cupboard got stripped. And then it was, I think it was tough. And then it just kind of fell off. But it's a shame, because it was probably my most favorite presentation of wrestling. I mean, I've always been a story and character guy first, just in anything. But it was definitely mind blowing for what they were doing. But they had a ton of missteps. Like, they didn't have the first season available to watch legally before the second season started. And like, you'd think, right, but like 5 episodes in, they finally got it on iTunes, but it's too late at that point. I mean, now you're asking for people to catch up on a season and a half. So, I mean, there's just missteps and things that, they wouldn't let the wrestlers who wrestled in Lucha Underground gimmicks that wrestled in other gimmicks use their Lucha Underground stuff on the other companies. And I think that would have brought them more exposure had they did it, but they did it as like a protectionist thing. And, like Jeff Cobb wrestled as Matanza, and he was like sort of one of the big monsters in the show. But then he had to go out on the indies and just wrestle as Jeff Cobb. And at the time, he's got a name now, but he didn't have a name then, as much of a name. So like, it hurts. It hurts if he's wrestling as Matanza on those shows, maybe it brings more people to the party, so to speak. So
sure.
It was there's so much. Wrestling is a fascinating subculture, which is why I write Headlocked, and why I spend so much time in it. There's so many different layers of just insanity all across the board.
Well, and honestly, man, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this, but from 1989 to 2006, I was covering boxing very heavily. I wrote for Ring Magazine. I wrote for Boxing Illustrated. In my radio and occasional TV work that I did in the 90s and early 2000s, covered a lot of fights and things. And, I know they're both combat sports, and, we throw in MMA as well. But I always appreciated the weird aspects of wrestling, because the same thing with boxing. We got a lot of, and I'm talking about wrestling again, and although you may have this feeling about some wrestling promoters and some companies as well, they're like carnies with millions of dollars to play with. Sure, that was boxing to me when I was covering, especially in the 90s and early 2000s.
And there was a lot, like Vince McMahon for a long time sort of played on the fact that people didn't take wrestling seriously, because he was doing these things. And then one of the things that he would do, he was famous for, is he would, start an interview and be like, yes, I took steroids and I cheated on my wife. And then he would lie about everything else. But people would think that because he opened up with this sort of vulnerability that, he was gonna shoot him straight. And then so many people just didn't understand sort of the nuances about wrestling and how sort of restrictive their contracts were. And a lot of that's gotten a lot better over the years. But there were just a lot of things that happened that were sort of, oh, we don't take it seriously because it's wrestling, right? Or, hey, Jimmy Snuka might have killed a girl in a hotel room, right? Like, oh, isn't that stuff's fake? You know what I mean? Like they hide behind a lot of that, and they can't do that anymore. But for a long time, they were able to sort of skirt a lot of stuff that way.
No, I get it, man. And again, it's I would assume that the rise of AEW and even WCW and ECW back when it was, not absorbed by the WWF or E, that this competition is almost forced better conditions, I would assume, with Vince and WWE or whomever today is running WWE, if it's Triple H and Stephanie, I don't know.
I think some of it they came to, I think, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure a lot of it. I mean, I'm a firm believer that there isn't a dollar in the world that's paid, that isn't paid grudgingly. So every company is going to try to pay you the littlest they can get away with, and which is frustrating, but it is what it is. So it's not like they're any different than Amazon or anybody else. I mean, I know at one point they started covering the guys' injuries if they happened in the ring. And then, I think when all the 80s guys started dying, they started offering rehab to people and stuff like that, and whatever, free rehab to try to sort of stem the tide. And, is it altruism? Is it just protecting your image? It's probably somewhere in between. So I think there's a lot of that. It's definitely different now. I mean, now they're making so much money. I think the Fox deal that they signed that just ended, I think was the thing that sort of made everything mainstream. Because to me, growing up, even in the Hogan and Austin eras when it was popular, it still wasn't cool. I mean, I got made fun of perpetually right up through my younger days, right up through college or whatever. And even though they were drawing record ratings, like still people would be like, you loser.
Oh, interesting.
But now it's so woven into the fabric of pop culture that it's a whole different animal now. And I do think that them signing that deal on Fox, and like it was a unprecedented amount of money, and the stock went up and whatever. And I think because the hardest thing for wrestling for the longest time, like when Raw was on USA and it was the highest rated show on cable, they would still get preempted for the US Open and the Westminster Kennel Club show because they could charge higher ad rates.
Understood.
Because a lot of companies didn't take wrestling fans seriously as consumers. And I think it took a long time for that. And now you see it. Now you see sort of bigger brands advertise during wrestling and sponsor shows. But it wasn't like that for a long, long time. And that'd be crazy, right? It's the number one show on cable, but you're making less money because people are like, and I dealt with that a lot when I tried to get Headlock started. People would say to me like, oh, people don't buy wrestling comics, wrestling fans can't read, all kinds of stuff. I had all kinds of shit that people said to me. So,
but and this is years ago, Tim Truman tried to sell somebody on a Western comic back in the early 2000s, and nobody was interested. So he made it himself, and he went to cowboy magazines to promote it. And he made a good profit on it and stuff. Yeah. And I love that story. And that's what you did with your comics. You went to the wrestling events. You're there, man. And I don't know how much you table at wrestling events or what promoters allow you to be at events. You tell me.
I mean, I did it for a long time. I do it less now, just because, one of the sort of, I would say, less fortunate aspects of AEW is that there was sort of Ring of Honor was my sweet spot. They were fans that were open to non-WWE wrestling. They were wrestling fans. There's a lot of people who say they're wrestling fans, but they're really WWE fans. In the same way that there's a lot of people who think they're comic book fans, but they're just superhero fans. And that's fine. It is what it is, right? Like I'm not, it is what it is. It's just I want to find the people that are going to be interested in my stuff. And there's certain people that are only going to buy WWE branded stuff. But Ring of Honor, like those people were open to it. So like AEW sort of took that whole style and aesthetic and basically co-opted it and made it mainstream or whatever. And now they sell their merch to those people. And like independent fans I still do fine at some independent shows, but they don't necessarily draw back in like 2018, yeah, that was a crazy year. But like people would draw like 700-800 fans at a show. I could go set up and make like whatever, $1,500, $2,000 in a clip, and they sometimes they let me set up for free. Sometimes they they charge me. They're certainly not charging me. My New York Comic Con booth is $10,000. So
Jesus,
I mean, it's a whole different, they're certainly not charging me that. So,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Maybe I'm paying somebody $100, somebody, sometimes people would want, but Ring of Honor used to let me sell at their shows. I think I was the only outside vendor they ever had, but they supported me from the beginning across multiple owners. Like when they first came out, they put an ad in the back of my first issue of Headlocked.
Yeah.
They would let me sell they'd give me like a little corner of the merch table to sell my books. And they were always super supportive. It's just it's different now because it's a subsidiary of AEW, so like I can't sell my stuff there. But I do a lot of shows, and now with Vampiro and Bigfoot, I think I'm going to sort of start bleeding into some horror shows and maybe do some of those like creature festivals and stuff like that. And
sure.
Just I love, a lot of people don't like traveling, but I grew up poor and I didn't go, like I lived 2.5 hours north of New York City, and I didn't go to New York City till I was 31. Like the last time, I mean, I don't know. And now I go all the time, but like I've been everywhere. I was a guest at a show in Australia this year. I was a guest at a show in Alaska. I've been all over the place, because I make comics. So like, I love traveling, and I love, for the longest time too, I managed warehouses, trucking, whatever. And so like, I just like being amongst my people. Right. And I like being amongst, just different people and the weirdos and whatever. So like, I mean, I'm sort of tickled at the idea of maybe getting to go to like the Mothman Festival and sling funny books. And it's just, like, I don't know. The whole thing has exceeded my wildest expectations. I mean, I kind of wish it was easier, but I think if it was easier, then it wouldn't be what it is. But it's, I just wanted to make a cool wrestling comic because I thought all the other wrestling comics were shitty. And now, I've been, somebody paid for my flight for another continent to go sell my books. And like, you just can't trade that, right? Like The Wire is my favorite TV show, and the second season is my favorite season. And the character of Frank Sabaka was my favorite character. Like I love that whole thing. And the guy that plays him, Chris Bauer, big wrestling fan, loves my books, wrote a foreword for my last book. I mean, how can you even put a price on that? So it's been an incredible journey, and I've got to make a lot of cool stuff, and I'll always be eternally grateful for it. But yeah, I love going anywhere. I can go to wrestling shows and write off on my taxes.
Well, honestly, you're the definition of DIY, do it yourself and everything. It's and again, because that's what you have to do, especially when you are an independent creator, and your tenacity. I've always respected that.
I mean, no one's going to hire you. I mean, the sort of the weird secret of comics is like, you can't get hired to make comics until you make your own comic. Like you can't, no one's going to hire you to write at Marvel until you've proven, and it's a weird trial by fire thing like that. I didn't understand when I started. I just took I wrote a business plan and a script and a pitch. And I start talking to editors and they're like, well, where's your art? I'm like, I'm not an artist. You're a comic book company and I'm a writer. Like one of us is probably better suited to having, so
you hire the artist. Exactly.
Right? And so people don't understand that a lot of times when they try to break in, they're like, oh yeah, how do I write Superman? I'm like, well, let me tell you. But and I do
Mike,
a lot of panels.
I get those emails. I got a great idea for a Batman story, Superman story, and it's like, okay, step one, they got enough people doing that. Well, you got and the great thing is, and it's like, and truly, some people just really have a block about this. It's like, do what Liefeld did and create Supreme, or all the different Batman ciphers that have come out over the years, and it's like you could do it that way. Oh no, it's got to be a Nightwing story. Well, good luck. All right, I don't know if you're ever going to get anywhere, but good luck.
There's a bunch of elements in Vampiro that I had originally sort of conceived for a Star Wars project, if I ever got the chance, and I was like, well, this is a good spot for him, and so I did. And but that's the thing. And I do these panels to, about making your own comics and trying to get people fired up about creating and all that. And, it's interesting. So many people make excuses for themselves, and really what it is so many people, you're afraid to suck. And like, you have to suck. You have to give yourself permission to suck for a long time, and then you'll be good. And that's it. But so many people can't handle that part of it. And, and there's a lot of it too. Like, you just don't know what to do or how it's done and whatever. So I try to give people the tools, like, to do whatever, right? Like, there's a million ways you can make comics now, right? I mean, you can just do the zines, or you can do web comics. You can just make a web comic on Tumblr, for God's sakes. I mean, there's a million ways to do it. I mean, the trick now is finding your audience, because there's so many people making stuff. So you got to chase them down. And that's why I'm on the road so much. I mean, like, I want people. I was just in North Dakota at a show. It's the first time I've ever been in North Dakota. And I sold a ton of, we had a Vampiro ash can for San Diego. I sold a ton of them. And there's so much enthusiasm for it, but they're not going to see that if I'm not there in their face with this book. And be like, yo, look at this. So it's how it has to be, right? It's the end game thing, right? There's 14 million realities, but this is the only one that works.
Beyond hand selling and selling at the Headlock Comic website, are there stores? Do you have a group of stores across the country that stock your books and stuff, and you have a relationship with?
There are stores, yeah. There are stores that order from me. I think that's going to expand a little bit coming out with. I think once Vampiro hits, I think that's going to help. I've never had a Diamond account. I literally just opened one, and I'm thinking just about putting my trades through it, and maybe doing some sort of direct market exclusive covers or something. But it's one of the 14,000 things I'm working on. But the other thing I wanted to talk about that I didn't get to talk about with Vampiro before was the covers. So
let's talk about it.
We have the cover artist for the first two issues is Raphael Galore, who was he used to paint the sort of Frazetta style fantasy covers for Lucha magazines back in the day, and he hasn't done anything in a while. And like Mass Republic found him, and he's like 85 now, and he's taking care of his wife. But he did this cover that you can see here, and then he did the cover for number 2. And then the other sort of master painter is his name is Picasso. He's doing 3 and 4, and then Galore's back on 5, and we're sort of alternating them out. And I mean, they're just producing just incredible covers. And it's awesome. It's the team is just perfect, right? Napalm is our artist. He's got a longer name. He's Dr. El Terrifico, Dr. Napalm, whatever. But he's there's so much noise in the book, and it's very kinetic, right? There's guns and there's music and there's cars and whatever. And he's like, he brings such energy to his art. And then Jacob Baskell, who's done all of my lettering for Headlock and stuff, is my longest collaborator, is doing all the sound effects and the lettering and stuff. And like, he's really done an exceptional job because it's a noisy book. And, he's really sort of bringing that together. We really got a great team on it. And I feel like I'm working on issue 4 or 5 right now. And, we're all in different parts of the process, but I think we're really hitting our stride as a team. And it's really fun to see.
That's thrilling, man. That's great. Does I always ask people, especially when they have a vibe and there's a music vibe to the comic they're making, does Vampiro, would he for this comic or just in general, like I could see like you guys maybe setting up a Spotify kind of playlist of his music or something like that? We've
definitely thought about that. Like it's funny. It's something of a larger thing I want to do because there's so many wrestlers that do music, right? Like Mickey James does country music, and AJ Francis is a rapper, and Trick Williams has been doing raps on NXT now and stuff. And I thought about it doing a Tales from the Road story with like a companion album to it or whatever, where everybody, it's just, again, if I had all the time in the world, right?
We need more staff, Michael. Believe me, I'm suffering the same thing with Word Balloon in terms of the things I want to do and the ways I want to expand. And I'm a one-man operation, so I hear you, man.
So I'm definitely making attempts to grow. Like for the longest time, I was sort of managing truck drivers and warehouses and stuff, and I was tied to a building, so I could do how many shows I could do, and it's sort of just do what I could do, and I want to do more. And so, like I said, I'm in the middle of 7 projects, and I'm looking at a Diamond account and PR people and stuff, and just trying to figure out how I can sort of take my stuff to the next level. Because I mean, the one thing I don't have a problem with is just, everybody, I mean, listen, maybe people, there's people that have read my stuff and don't like it, but I've never heard from them. I've never gotten a negative letter. I've never gotten a negative comment. Like, I see the same people year after year that buy my stuff and whatever. And like, I just want to get it to the next level. But one of the hardest things is just for people to know I exist, right? Because I don't take part in the comic book apparatus. So like, I don't exist in comics to so many comics people. And then I'm doing non-branded wrestling stuff too. So it's a tricky little niche. It's a nice niche that I've got for myself, but I'd like to grow it a little bit. And I think that, the hardest thing is just getting people to try it. Like everybody that, I feel like everybody that tries our stuff really likes it. I met a guy at Baltimore this weekend who I was shocked hadn't heard of us, and he bought bought one of our first issues, and then was like, "Oh, this is incredible," But I mean, I've been making books for 15 years, and this guy's a wrestling fan who likes comics, but somehow I've eluded his path. So that's the frustrating part, and that's the thing I think about is how do I sort of expand my reach and get in front of people and get them to take a shot on what we're making. So it's all very unconventional, but it's all very fun. And one of the things that you were saying before, like you've said a couple of times about being a novice about wrestling. I mean, one of the things that I prioritize when I write is accessibility. I wrote Headlocked from the point of view of a theater major who drops out of college to chase his dream of becoming a wrestler.
Yeah.
So like, you don't have to know anything about wrestling because you're going to learn it along with him. Right. So like, you just have to know it's, oiled up hairless men pretending to hit each other. Right. And that's it. And so like Vampiro, the way we do it, we start with Everett Holden, who's the music blogger, and sort of work our way into it. So like, I try to make everything accessible to people, like, and not be burdened down with lore and continuity and whatnot. Like if you pick up number 1 and read it in succession, you'll be able to follow the story. And, and that matters to me. I've been so many people's first comic book, which is something that I'm eminently proud of, particularly because, like I said, I barely exist in comics, but there's so many people who've never read a comic before that bought Headlock because they wanted to read it. And, when I bought my first comic book, it was because it had Spider-Man and Captain America on the cover.
Of course.
Right? Like most people come in because of the characters, right? But like people came in because they wanted to read my book, which I take very seriously. And there's a ton of people who didn't like wrestling that bought Headlock because of the story that I pitched them. And then they were like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to watch wrestling, but I definitely have a different opinion of it, but they still read the book.
Wow.
Because think about it, right? Like how many people, everybody's seen Rocky, but how many people watch boxing on the reg, right? Like,
you're right.
It's a story that you can enjoy that you don't, so, I mean, those are the things, accessibility is the thing that I prioritize in my writing. So like you can check out anything we have whatever level you're at.
How many like other creative people are there wrestling fiction novels that are out there that I am not aware of? I love, as far as the documentaries about wrestling that Vice and A&E have been running on cable. And again, I know this is all stories that you likely know backwards and forwards, but I am fascinated by those. And a lot of times, like I said, when I hang out with my buddy Chuck, I'm like, I don't need to watch this week's AEW, but I absolutely will watch the documentaries that they've been making and stuff lately because they're fantastic.
Yeah, there's been some fiction. There's a guy named Paul O'Brien that did a trilogy. I think the first book was called Blood Red Turns Dollar Green. And it was really, really good. It was very well done. There's like anything, I think once when you lower the bar to entry, I think it's a mixed bag that comes through the door.
100%.
Right? For every person that maybe the gate held out, there's 1,000 people that the gate should have held out.
I get it.
Because they're not ready and they're making stuff and whatever. So there's a lot of bad stuff too. There's a lot of people who think they know what's going on with wrestling because the internet tells them stuff and they've read, the Wrestling Observer or whatever. And it's funny because comic creators who like wrestling are the most guilty of this, but they speak with such authority on what they know. And I can assure you, because I know everybody sort of personally, that the internet doesn't know anything. Like they might know some stuff, but they don't know a lot. And there's just, I watch so many people just make very confident statements about things that they know because they read it on some website. And if somebody did that to them in comics, they would be so mad. Like if somebody did, you know what I mean? They're like the Zack Snyder fans of wrestling, whatever, you know. Like, but at the same time, they're bitching about it in their field, right? So it just makes me laugh because, you know, all these wrestlers like, oh, the internet doesn't know anything, and they're like, oh no, we know everything, but they really don't. I mean,
Michael,
I know a million things that have never ever come to light. You know,
one of my biggest pet peeves are the comic book podcasters out there. And my poster child, and I'm sure my audience is sick of hearing about it, is, oh, you know, Vinnie Coletta sucked because he erased all those Kirby lines when he was inking him. And it's like, well, do you know the good story about Vinnie Coletta? That when Steve Englehart and Marshall Rogers were doing that 70s Joker laughing fish story, and DC was ready to pull the plug on it, and Vinnie, because he was the art director, went to bat for them, and I'm like, no, you got to finish this story. This is an exceptional story. And they did. And we have a classic because of it. And it's like, shit's more complicated, jerks, than you think. And it really gets me angry. A lot of the other podcasters and YouTubers that cover comics and think they know what they're talking about, and they're full of it. And
everybody struggles with nuance, right? Like something's hot and then it's not. And you know what I mean? And it's fun. Like, I mean, I remember when I started reading comics, like I couldn't really, you know, I wasn't able to appreciate like Jack Kirby's art, right? Because you're younger, you want the flashy. I'm like, oh, it's this Jim Lee guy. He's amazing, right? And that's not to say that Jim Lee is not amazing, because he's absolutely amazing. But like as you get older, you really appreciate, you know, the work that Kirby did, and like it's just funny, like just, you know, you're sort of, as your understanding changes, your perspective changes, and you know that for a long time, I think a lot of people come to art and they want it to be a reproduction of reality. And that's, I mean, it's a skill. It's a super skill, but I also think it's somewhat of the least interesting way to interpret something, right? Because we got eyes. I can see it. Like, you're just drawing what I see with my eyes. But if you can do something different, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, I love Eduardo Rizzo. Like, I just, oh my God, right? Like, just amazing. And, you know, it's, you know, it's, it just brings a vibe to, you know, to things. And you know, I think Paul Chadwick is so underrated. Like, so concrete is the reason why I write comics.
Interesting.
And there's a lot of people that have a hard time squaring that, including Paul. Like when I met him, I mean, I don't really fan out for too many people, but I really geeked out when I met Paul at San Diego, and I don't think he understood it. But, you know, I think he was appreciative. But Concrete Think Like a Mountain completely changed my perception of what comics could be. You know, and he told a complicated story with nuance, and like they were tackling sort of real issues, and, you know, just everything that he does is fantastic. And it's he's always kind of been my guy. But yeah, so it's
I get it.
Probably a thing that nobody would guess if they had 100 guesses.
Well, Mike, honestly, and especially given the kind of comics you make, but also in the 19 years that I've done Word Balloon, I literally think you are the first creator to tell me how much Paul Chadwick really, because of him, meant to you. And I'm with you, man. I even at the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund one year, they had this wonderful print of Concrete. And I had to buy it because, yeah, man, that was one of my 80s books. And yeah. Chadwick's amazing. And again, now I feel guilty that he hasn't been on Word Balloon yet. I got to reach out and get him because brilliant creator.
Yeah, I have an original up on my wall that he drew for me and stuff. I mean, it just yeah, fantastic. It's interesting. Like, just, I don't know. And it's funny that one of the people that I've sort of become friends with just doing the circuit so much is Howard Chaykin. And I love Howard's work. And it's interesting though how like comics comes into your life, right? Like, so at the time I'm just reading X-Men books and whatever, and one of my roommates in college is super into all the Howard Chaykin stuff, and so he's introducing it to me and whatever. And it's funny because he was a year older than me, but he died a couple weeks ago from cancer.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
And you know, it just got me thinking. I'm like, oh, you know, this is the guy that, you know, I'm like, you know, I'm friends with Howard Chaykin now. and to the point where, you know what I mean? And I don't know if I would have had, you know, maybe I wouldn't have the same appreciation if this guy doesn't put those books in my hands. And I don't know, just interesting, weird.
No, but again, yeah, but that's the great thing about comics, man. You really do pass them on to friends. And same thing happened with me. My college roommate, you know, he grew up on the cartoons like we all did, but really didn't know the comics until I was living with them. And I'd bring in, and this is Watchmen and Dark Knight. And he's like, oh my God, this art, it's really like interesting. And it's because a lot of normal people that aren't into the hobby, when you say comics, and again, I always feel terrible as my example, but I'm like, they're like thinking of High and Lois and Sunday Funnies and stuff. And his wife came with us to a comic store, and I showed her Dave McKean. I showed her so many great, you know, wonderful painters that do comics and stuff. And she's like, I had no idea. And it's like, yeah, it's that sophisticated. The art is that sophisticated. And thankfully the you know, the hobby grew up. But you're absolutely right about the classics like Kirby and people. Yeah. And I do hear a lot of people that grew up in the 90s or the 2000s or even now. And it's like, Watchmen, everybody makes a big deal about Watchmen. I don't get it. And it's like, well, that's because you've read all these poor imitations of what Watchmen is. Even what you said about realistic art. Alex Ross, one of my sponsors and a wonderful artist, but there's something in Alex's art because there are a million painters that try to do a realistic style.
Oh yeah,
but the passion isn't there, or something is missing.
There's just something like I would just say like somehow, and I don't know, this doesn't make any sort of logical sense, but he's able to capture heroism. It's like he put a heroism filter over his art, and everything just sort of, you know, everything just spells hero. Like I just think it's and it's just it's a thing that obviously not everybody can do. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. But the other thing though, that kind of you know, the hobby grew up, but I also feel like it narrowed itself for a long time.
Oh sure.
And I think it's made it's hard. You know, like I said, I prioritize accessibility, and I think that there's a very small hardcore fan base that wants what they want, and they want it to be super whatever, but I think it's made it inaccessible for people to pick up, you know. And people are like, oh, we did it. But like when I started reading, there was one X-Men book, and I picked that one book up, and yeah, I was dropped in the middle of it, but it's one book. There's not 4 titles, and there's not crossovers and all that other stuff. And it just becomes, you know, it becomes difficult, I think, for people to jump in. And I think that's, I don't know, it's very frustrating on some level, because I understand you want to serve that audience because they've been so loyal and they've, you know, they deserve what they want too. But like, it's hard because then how do you give that person starting out what they want? And I don't know. It's I don't know, smarter people than me probably. I don't know. Nobody's been able to figure it out. So maybe nobody's got the answer.
They haven't, Mike. And in fact, I remember, and I don't know if you remember, but when the Bryan Singer first X-Men movie came out, and Marvel got an amazing deal where TV Guide, when TV Guide was still a thing, put a scene from a current X-Men comic in it, and it was impenetrable.
Yeah.
You had no idea what was going on. I don't even remember if the X-Men beyond the obvious of maybe Wolverine and Cyclops were in the scene, but it's like, and I'm a comic book fan, and I had no idea what the hell was going on. And you're right. I think that's one of the reasons why DC currently is dropping this month all these absolute titles and like their version of the Ultimate Universe, where they're starting at square one. And in fact, on one of my shows that's posted here on YouTube, after the show in the chat, someone's like, well, I don't understand why they don't just create a new version of a character that's like Batman, but not all the differences that Snyder is putting in absolute Batman. And if you don't know, you know, he's making him working class, he's not a millionaire, and all these things. He's like, well, make a new character. And it's like, no, they are tied to these characters. And it's not the comics, it's the licensing of the comics. That's where the real money is.
Well, it's also the fans, right? Like, I mean, how many new superhero characters? I mean, what, like Deadpool and Harley Quinn are probably it. Like in terms of,
and both are 30 years old or older. So yes,
but everything else is like Super Friends era, whatever. Like it's tough.
Or
I mean,
earlier.
I think
Yes.
I mean the movies. I think the movies definitely made Guardians of the Galaxy a thing. You know, and it happens a little bit, but I mean, you're still most of these characters. When I was a kid, I had an old maid set of Marvel things, and that's how I came to know. Like I knew the Captain America, Thor, Spider Man, but then they had other ones. Like they had that's how I discovered Doctor Strange, Silver Surfer, Ghost Rider, some of the sort of next tier guys.
Yeah. Me too.
So, but like those are still all the characters that we're dealing with MCU wise. I mean, like I said, Guardians was a sort of out there, and it's become huge for them. But
Mike, when I was talking to Casada at One San Diego a year or two before the movie came out, and I'm like, "What's next?" And he's like, "Guardians of the Galaxy," and I'm like, "Why?" I'm like, really, man? These and I was even thinking of the '70s, Vance Astro and some of the classic characters, and I'm like, Joe, you got all these other higher like B level or even other A level characters they hadn't gotten to yet. And he's like, John, it's going to be huge. And who the fuck knew that Groot and Rocket Raccoon would be in every toy box of kids that have since seen the Guardians? And it's like, you guys were right. I was wrong.
Sure.
I'm really glad I was wrong. They're fun movies. Good for you, man.
And it was like I was skeptical too, but like you watch that first trailer and you see Rocket on Groot and they're both shooting guns and you're like, okay, I'm in. You got me. Like
I agree. And I mean, that whole trailer, and especially using that fantastic 70s version of Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Swede. And it's like, yes. And Mike, I don't know what's going on. And listen, I'm a bleeding heart liberal. I completely admit it, but I'm a classic liberal. And I really worry sometimes that the culture wars are impacting the television and the film and even the comics in some degrees, where I mean that movie was so full of testosterone, the first Guardians movie, and it's like, I'm high on believing that you're in love with me, and it's like, yeah, this guy's a jerk, but that's the point, man. He's supposed to be a jerk. And right. I just worry sometimes that the culture wars are getting in the way of good entertainment.
I don't know. I mean, obviously they made that, right? Like, I mean, everybody's going to point to Han Solo and be like, I want to make my version of Han Solo and whatever. I mean, I think sometimes too, you just need a guy with cachet to do it, right? Like James Gunn obviously had the cachet to make the thing that he wanted to make. So that probably helps. There's nobody else that does that story that makes it pop like that, right? That's why I always try to encourage people. And that's why I like working how I work and not through people, because like I said, I mean, I think everybody should have an editor to some degree, but like,
of course,
I also think that if you have too many hands in it, you rip out what makes it your story and sort of make it this sort of pandering mass market thing. And then that's when people feel like, oh, we've got, the Wolverine Origins Deadpool and not the Ryan Reynolds or the regular Deadpool, because they're both Ryan Reynolds. But, and so like, I just, there's probably, if you gave 1 million guys the opportunity to make wrestling comics, I bet you nobody would come up with the idea of doing Tales from the Road. But that's the thing that works for me, and that's the thing that I want to make, and that's the thing that only I can make. So that's what I'm making. And,
absolutely. There's another cover, everybody, and obviously
this is a story I did with Christian he's in AEW now, but famous. We collaborated. It's actually an adaptation of a true story that happened when he was on the Canadian Death Tours so there's a whole thing where up super north, like they have to wait till the lakes freeze over, and then they do a little wrestling tour, and it's a bunch of guys in a van, and they go out to perform for these little villages and stuff out there that don't get entertainment. There's a lot of guys that sort of cut their teeth on those, and so we adapted a real life story from that. That's a lot of fun, and there's got a fun little joke at the end of it, but it's so that's kind of those are the comics that I want to make. And it's not necessarily, Daniel Warren Johnson may do a Powerbomb. It's a comic book he wanted to make, and nobody else would have made that book. So that's, you know what I mean? Like that's where I feel like, sometimes the current superhero books are so top down directed. You just kind of, you lose a little bit of what makes it weird and special and whatever. So
trust your voice, Mike, because again, based on my own experience reading your stuff and everything, no, authenticity is really the way to describe Heglock Comics in general and what you're doing. So no, continued success. Let's talk sooner than later, and let's not wait 10 or 12 years between conversations. So really, when you've got some of these other new projects to bring up, if it's at the end of the year or the beginning of next year, just let me know, and we'll remind everybody that Vampiro will be featured at New York Comic Con that weekend, August 6th or October 16th.
October 16th. Yep, that's when
Beautiful,
the book drops on the 16th. The con is the 17th. If you're in, I think we're at the Wrestling Universe store on the 16th, Vamp and I, for a signing on the day it comes out, and then we'll be doing New York on Thursday. So, if you missed your chance to get it through your LCS, I mean, you can come get it from us, but I would say that I would recommend pre-ordering it. Given my experiences, I don't know what the numbers are, but usually number 2s get cut way down. So I would say, secure your copy now. But it's going to be a barn burner. It's so much fun. And it's like I tell everybody, what I was going for was a midnight screening at like a movie theater, grindhouse theater, whatever, bucket of popcorn, smile on your face, forget about your troubles and think about, an underground rockabilly vampire guitarist who's hunting, a motorcycle gang of nuns with shotguns.
Sounds great, man. Vampiro, everybody, from Massive Comics and Michael Kingston and Company. Way to go, man. And truly, I have tremendous respect of how you market and sell your books and write and create your books, because again, you trust your voice. And I think that's great, and in all aspects of what you do. So keep up the great work, and we'll talk again soon. But thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great to talk again.
As always, buddy. And I look forward to seeing you at the next show. I won't be in New York, but hopefully you'll be in Chicago or somewhere where we're both at the same show, and we'll definitely be talking. I got to get you a Terrificon, man. If you've never done,
I did the first one.
Oh my God, we got to remind Mitch to bring it back, man.
I did. I just talked to him in Baltimore about doing it this year. I've been a guest at shows whenever, like the past couple of years. I was a guest at GalaxyCon this year, and it just bumped with it. But I definitely want to prioritize going back this year because I haven't been in a long time. And I like Mitch, and I think he's done a real tremendous job of building that show. And I know
a big component of what he does. He brings wrestlers in.
Well, it's funny because
it's natural for you to tap into that Terrificon wrestler audience.
Jerry and I did the first one, the very, very first one, and and then I don't think he had wrestlers for a couple of years, and then he started bringing them in. So I think. It's definitely a fun show, and I would definitely like to do it. It's be nice to do a show I can drive to.
Well, yeah, that's another reason. Absolutely, man. I was thinking, and where I don't even know where you are East Coast wise.
I live about 20 minutes north of Albany, but I fly out of Albany, which is a rough airport. And but I've been, I just did 3 shows in a row. I did North Dakota and Madison, Wisconsin, and then Baltimore, and they're all flights and whatever. And again, I never take it for granted when I get to fly, because when I was younger, that was a thing that rich people did. And, so
absolutely, man.
I every time I get on a plane, I think, my mom's gonna be proud of me. So
that's excellent, man. No, I hear you. Dad had a little money. I wouldn't say we were upper class. We're definitely like good middle class. And I when I started flying, to me, especially being an Apollo kid, it felt like, all right, this is the closest I'm gonna ever get to space travel. And even with the bullshit that we go through with the TSA and take your shoes and your belt off and all the nonsense, when we take off, I'm in Michigan. I'm sitting in the capsule, man. I'm very happy to fly. I love it.
So I flew to North Dakota for a show, and they flew me to Montana, and then I had to take like a little plane where they weigh your luggage and they ask you how much you weigh and seat you accordingly. And it was really cool because the plane only had 6 people on it, but you could see out of the front of the plane, and then all the windows were bigger than you would get on like a regular airplane. So like if you kind of sat back and squinted, like it was almost like you were flying like Superman, like you could see this big panorama of like the Montana landscape.
Wow.
And it was really cool. I was nervous at first when I got on, I'm not gonna lie, but once we were up in there, I was like, oh, this is amazing.
That's fantastic, man. Everybody, tomorrow on Word Balloon, tomorrow night, Jimmy Demonakis is going to join me to talk about the Mike Mignola documentary that he and his co-director just made. And it's streaming, and we'll be talking in detail about that. Thursday afternoon, I'm going to talk to Shelley and Philip Bond and Will Potter, and they have put out, I believe, Volume 3, or they're in the midst of a Kickstarter for Volume 3 of their fun book Geezer, which is a look at 80s rock, because Will Potter, and I'm blanking now on what band and from England that he was from. Not a big A-list band, but a very, moderately successful band. So they always have great stories, and that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to happen on Thursday afternoon. And then I got a whole bunch of stuff I got to firm up before I start talking about it for next week and the rest of October here on Word Balloon. I can tell you Garth Ennis is coming up later this month, and that'll be great to talk to Garth. And we'll see how we do beyond that. Chris Ryle's going to come on to talk about, I don't know if you know this, Mike, he put out a new deluxe edition of the Origins of Marvel Comics Stan Lee book from the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And that has certainly gotten some controversial coverage in the last month or so, which I find fascinating. But, I'm really looking forward to talking to Chris about that and more. So lots of cool stuff coming up in October, and happy to start with Michael for the first day of October. So everybody, until next time, stay safe, stay happy, stay healthy.